To order, can I have a roll call, please?
Alan Bucknam,
Present.
Emery Dorsey,
Present.
Daniel Larson,
Present.
Janet Leo, here. Scott Ohm,
Here.
Richard Peterson, here. Amanda Weaver, Vivian Voss.
Present.
Right, could we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right. Could I have a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
All right, any discussion on the agenda order? All right, let's vote, please.
Motion passed 8-0.
All right. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of January 17th.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of January 17th.
I'll second.
Okay, do we have any discussion on the minutes? All right, let's vote, please.
Motion passed 7-0 with one abstaining.
Thank you. Right, now is the time for the public forum. Okay. So the public forum is the time for any person to speak on any subject not appearing on the agenda. If you would like to speak in reference or regards to one of the cases we're hearing tonight, you'll have the opportunity to do so. I do see we have one person signed up on the public forum, Michelle McLeod, at 3960 Upham. Did you want to speak on something not on the agenda? Okay, no problem. You'll have the opportunity to speak when we hear the case. All right, if no one else, we'll go ahead and close the public forum and open the public hearing. We have three cases that are all related tonight. Case numbers WZ-18-017, WZ-18-18, and WS-18-02. This is an application filed by Upham Partners, LLC for approval of a zone change from residential 3 to planned residential development with an outline development plan, approval of a specific development plan, and approval of a major subdivision for 38 townhomes located at 4000, 4042, 4062, and 4066 Upham Street. Could I have the staff reports for these cases, please?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. For the record, I'm Lauren Micklack, Planning Manager with the City of Wheat Ridge Community Development Department. I'll be providing the presentation tonight, and I'd like to enter into the record the contents of the case file, the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, the subdivision regulations, and this digital presentation.
So entered, thank you.
Thank you. This property is located within the City of Wheat Ridge. All appropriate notification and posting requirements have been met, and Planning Commission does have jurisdiction to hear this case. So we'll start as we typically do. If we could maybe have just a little bit, the lights come down a little bit in here so we can see the slides. Thank you. We'll start with the aerial. This is a 2016 aerial. The subject property at 4000 to 4066 Upham is outlined here in blue. It's almost square in shape and nearly 2 acres in size, and you can see there's 4 existing single-family homes on the properties. They range in age and in condition. They were built between 1928 and 1952. The assessor has them listed in fair to average condition, and you can see that they're pretty small in size. I believe the smallest one is about 700 square feet and the largest about 1,200 square feet, and notably smaller than the lots on which they sit. Upham Street is the only street you see on the screen. North is to the top. Upham is about a half-mile in length from 38th to 44th, with very few local streets. There's one local street at the very north end that intersects it. We call it a mega block. There's not a really good local street grid in this neighborhood. We'll look at the zoning map here. There's a mix of land uses along Upham and 4 predominant zonings. So the subject site is zoned R3. That's the orange color in the middle of the screen. That's our multifamily zone district where properties could be eligible for single family, 2-family, or multifamily apartments. You can tell from the roof lines in this image that there are a variety of housing types. So there's 4 multifamily projects that surround the property. One immediately to the north here is about 2.5 stories. 3 on the other side of the street, a C court, 2 buildings on a single lot, and then another sort of C court to the south. Those range in densities of 21 to 26 units per acre. Some of those were built before the city incorporated, which is why they exceed our 21 unit per acre density cap. There are a few more single-family homes to the south of the subject property and another across the street. The greenish color here is the residential 2 zone district. That extends along to the north of the property and further north along Upham. In this area, most of the R2 zoning is single-family homes, although some of the properties are probably eligible for duplexes. The property to the east is owned by Jefferson County Public Schools. It's about 19 acres. It's functioning as a campus. Stevens Elementary is to the south of their property on 38th Avenue. Sebeski Academy you can see on the northern side here. And then they have a variety of play fields and ball fields. The sort of forested area immediately east of the subject site is the school campus's detention area. It's a fenced area, and that abuts the subject property. The other 2 colors you see on the screen are mixed-use neighborhoods, so the school campus does have mixed 2 zone district designations. MUN is common on 38th Avenue, and then the lighter blue color, mixed-use commercial, which is common on Wadsworth, the street immediately off the screen to the left. As was mentioned, this application tonight includes 3 components. So the applicant is proposing to redevelop the site into 38 townhomes and to rezone the property from residential 3 to planned residential development. Any planned development in the city is comprised of 2 documents, the outline and specific development plans, and we'll be looking at both of those tonight. The ODP establishes the zoning and includes development standards. The SDP, the specific development plan, shows the details of that development. Site plan, building elevation, landscaping, lighting. The third component that we're looking at tonight is the subdivision plat. That's a technical document that prepares land for development, establishes lot lines, easements, and right-of-way. For the purpose of tonight's presentation, I'm going to walk through all 3 of those documents and then talk about the review criteria and staff's findings. At the end of the evening, we'll ask the commission to make 3 separate motions, 1 for each of the documents. The code does allow for concurrent or sequential review of these 3 documents. We often see an ODP and then maybe an SDP and a plat together. We do occasionally see all 3 together. The way the code is written, it's essentially the applicant's choice, and so tonight we're seeing all 3 components. So we'll start here with the outline development plan. In this case, it's 2 sheets, and again, this is the document that establishes the planned residential development zoning. The cover sheet, I know it's illegible at this scale, but it essentially includes a vicinity map, our standard signature blocks, legal descriptions, and sort of the meat of this document, which are the development standards that I'll walk through here in a minute. The second sheet is a required component. It's a graphic sort of bubble diagram of how the development is proposed to be oriented in terms of general building locations and circulation patterns. We won't focus too much on this specific graphic because we have the benefit tonight of looking at the specific development plan. We can get a little bit more into detail, but it does complement some of the development standards that I want to walk through. So the permitted uses for the project are proposed to be simply townhomes and open space. Those would be the primary uses. The ODP does call out a few accessory uses, so customary for a residential project, household pets, home-based businesses. Specifically prohibits RV and boat storage. That's something we've been seeing frequently with a townhome project where there's just not space for that. In general, the project complies with the R3 zoning, which is the current zoning. Maximum height, 35 feet, that's our standard maximum height in all residential zone districts. The density is the biggest outlier from the R3 zoning. Again, they're proposing 38 units. That does come in just under our maximum of 21 units per acre and is compatible with those other multifamily properties that I mentioned. Setbacks are relatively similar to the R3 standards, so front minimum setback of 15 feet from Upham Street. And then the side setbacks vary a little. What they're proposing is a 10-foot setback for this westernmost building at the north and south, and then increasing to a minimum of a 20-foot setback for the longer buildings that are along the perimeter of the property. Because there's no development to the rear, there is a 5-foot setback proposed at the rear of the property. Parking is proposed to have 2 garage spaces per unit, 9 visitor spaces, and then 8 on-street spaces, which will be added by virtue of the applicant constructing curb gutter and sidewalk. The way that our R3 parking standards work is that it's related to the number of bedrooms, and then typically, for example, an apartment project, you'd need the number of parking stalls per bedroom per unit, and then 1 visitor space per 10. This is falling roughly in line with those R3 standards and exceeding sort of on a per unit basis what our visitor parking requirement would be. The applicant has sort of weighed the space options for parking versus open space. The architecture and open space for this project in particular make it unique. Planning Commission's aware that we use plan developments when we have either a unique property, a unique topography, a unique shape, or just a unique development project in general. The purpose of a plan development is to provide flexibility while also promoting unique and creative and sort of thoughtful designs. And in this case, the architecture and open space really make this a more unique townhome project compared to some of the ones that we've seen. The outline development plan requires that the project comply with our architectural and site design manual. That's typical of a multifamily, but because of the unique style here, they're combining traditional and contemporary styles with a nod to mid-century modern, and particularly with that mid-century modern element, they've proposed a couple of specific architectural standards for this project related largely to materials and windows. And then open space, the minimum 30% open space is consistent with R3. That's what we require for all multifamily projects. But the unique application here is in how they've designed that open space. Number one, in a sort of a central park that you're seeing here in the middle of the site around which all the buildings are organized. And number two, a real emphasis on front yards, not only to provide a little bit of an amenity to each unit, but also to promote more of sort of a neighborly feel. They're all units will have a front yard with a low fence, and we'll see a rendering of that later that I think will show how that's a little bit unique in this project in particular. So we'll move on to the specific development plan. All of these drawings should illustrate that they comply with the outline development plan standards that I just walked through. This document is quite a bit longer. It's 16 pages in total. Both documents get recorded at the county and run with the property. We're not going to go through all 16 pages tonight, but we'll hit the highlights with the site plan, landscape plan, and some of the building elevations. So we'll start here with the site plan. The orange shading that just appeared highlights where the buildings are located. In large part, they surround the perimeter or run along the perimeter of the property with two more buildings in the center here. So the 38 units are broken up into ranging from 2 to 6 units per building. As I mentioned, they all have 2-car garages, and those are denoted by the gray triangles that you can see. Those garages are all tuck under parking, meaning they're on the ground floor with living space above, and they're all alley loaded. So the alleys that serve the property are now shaded in gray and sort of laid out in a grid-like fashion. There's 2 access points proposed along Upham. That's required by the fire district to have 2 ways to get into a project of this size. The applicant was required to provide a trip generation letter, and that indicated that the project generates about 14 to 17 trips in the peak hour. Anytime a project is under 60 trips at peak hour, we don't require additional traffic analysis. So this project, we don't have any concerns about needing to widen Upham, for example, for a project of this size. This image is another version of the site plan, but highlighted sort of on the right-hand side are part of the drainage, elements of the drainage design. It is an off-site drainage design, which we don't see all that often, but again, what's unique here is the site is relatively flat, which is great for constructing buildings, but really challenging for making a drainage design work, complicated by the fact that we don't have storm sewer in Upham Street. So what the applicant did was work really productively with the school district to have a joint use of the existing detention facility that you saw earlier in the aerial. So they'll be piping the flows from this site to that existing detention facility and modifying it as needed. The school's been a good partner on this project and is ready to sign the necessary agreements regarding maintenance if and when this project were to be approved by the city. Their standard is not to sign those documents until they need to if the project is to move forward. If there's more questions on the drainage design, I should point out that the applicant's civil engineer is here, as is my colleague Jordan Jeffries from the Public Works Department. Next, we'll look at the landscape design. And the shaded areas on this page are the open space areas comprised of the central park that I mentioned earlier, all of the, so here's the park, all of the front yards along all of the units, between the units, and sidewalks along those. You can see it's a lot of open space for a project of this size. They do exceed our R3 standards in terms of the numbers of trees and shrubs. We typically require one tree and 10 shrubs per 1,000 square feet of required open space. So it's in excess of 250 shrubs and 40-some trees. We're not looking at the photometric on this slideshow, but it is included in the specific development plan. All of the sidewalks along the perimeter and through the site are proposed to be illuminated by decorative bollards with downcast light, so providing sufficient safety and lighting without disturbing sort of the neighborhood residential feeling, that character of the project. These are a couple of renderings. They're not included in the recorded specific development plan, but they're a good visual and three-dimensional view of sort of the scale of the project and particularly of that open space. So you're seeing in this view looking east from the middle of the project, the front yards that sort of face each other for those two central buildings. Helps you to get an understanding of the spacing between those two buildings, a little bit wider than, again, we typically see in a townhome project. This view is from the northern access off of Upham, and we're looking in towards that central open space. So pretty wide open there in the middle. And then this view is from Upham Street looking north and east at the frontage on Upham. Upham is a local street, so we don't have a requirement for a detached sidewalk and tree lawn, but they have proposed sort of a regular spacing of trees that mimic that effect of having street trees. The other features that you're seeing in this image are some of those architectural styles. So a variety of roof lines, masonry bases or first floors on the buildings, and a variety of siding colors and orientations, some vertical, some horizontal. The other feature here are the windows. So windows and light are often a focal point of mid-century modern architecture, and you can see there's really an abundance of windows on this project. It's particularly helpful for townhome projects, we think, where interior units tend to have fewer window options because they only have them on the two sides of the building. The specific development plan set, those 16 pages, does include architectural information, largely in the form of these monotone massing studies and then the two-dimensional elevation views. So you can see from the massing, the purpose of providing those was to really give a sense of the shadows and the changes in plane that we're often seeking. So recessed window bays, recessed garages, recessed entries, and then extended second floor patios. The elevations, we're just showing one of what was multiple sheets of elevations in the plan set. You can see there's 3-story buildings, variety of color combinations to make sure that these aren't sort of cookie cutter buildings on the project. The building height here, the maximum I mentioned was 35 feet at 3 stories, and depending on the roof line, the average heights here are about 32 to 34 feet. The next component of the application is the subdivision plat. And as I mentioned, that's the document that prepares land for development. So there are 4 existing single-family homes. This document would remove those existing lot lines and create the new lot lines. Again, the cover sheet here is including a lot of standard notes, legal description, vicinity maps. There's 2 pages of graphics that we'll walk through here briefly. So the first page establishes the lots and the tracts. So 38 lots, 1 for each of those townhome units, and then the open space and common areas are all contained within a variety of tracts. So alleys, sidewalks, parks. The purposes of each tract are noted on that first sheet. As with any subdivision or development, we look at the adjacent public street to confirm whether it meets current standards. And in this case, Upham Street is substandard. So the tract on the far left side of the property, it's sort of narrow in this area, is about 6 feet in width. So that dedication to the city will allow for the applicant to build that on-street parking, curb gutter, and sidewalk. The southern part of that right-of-way dedication is quite a bit wider. This is a little unusual, but parts of Upham Street were never formally dedicated, so they're essentially prescriptive right-of-way, meaning they've functioned as a public street for long enough that they're considered a public street. But this subdivision plat dedicates to the center line to officially dedicate that southern portion. We had a similar situation, the commission may recall, with the Weston 38 project, where we had to dedicate to the center line of Upham. The last sheet of the subdivision plat provides easements, and we often provide multiple graphics in a subdivision just for legibility. In this case, what you're seeing is the yellow shading is the sanitary sewer easement as required by that district, and the grayish blue U-shaped easement is the water district, or the water easement, which is required by the water district. For projects like this, they'd like to have that line looped, which is why it connects on two sides to Upham Street. As is typical for a larger development project, dry utility design is often ongoing, particularly with the way that Excel's design processes work. So the applicant has been working with Excel and Comcast and other utility providers. We've requested a standard condition whereby dry utility easements are shown on the plat if they're finalized by the time it's recorded. Otherwise, they're often completed by separate document. Even these two easements, which are shown here, would likely be created by separate document, which would be signed by the utility districts and simply referenced on this page. So those are the three documents themselves. I want to talk a little bit about process. A neighborhood meeting is required as a precursor to a zone change application, and we held that meeting in January of last year with 9 folks in attendance. When we did receive the application, we sent it on referral, the ODP, the SDP, and the plat to all of our utility providers, and didn't get any concerns from agencies. Again, the applicant's been working very closely with those providers. Internally, these applications are reviewed by planning and public works, building, parks and recreation. In this case, and as the commission is aware, for residential development, we have a land dedication requirement. That central park is not considered a public park, so there is still a fee in lieu of parkland dedication. There was a 15-day public comment period leading up to this public hearing, and we did receive 3 letters of support, written letters of support. Those were included in the packet from adjacent property owners. We've received 1 phone call, but no additional comments related to the project. The phone call was an inquiry. There are several sets of criteria that we look at when we're reviewing this kind of application. So we'll start with the zone change criteria. Among them is consistency with the city's adopted plans, and this image is an excerpt from the comprehensive plan Envision Wheat Ridge, which was adopted in 2009. This is specifically taken from the structure map, which provides sort of high-level guidance and designations that correlate to the goals and statements within the comprehensive plan. The property is shown by that blue star sort of in the middle, and you can see there's a lot of designations in this immediate area. So the structure map's not intended to be a parcel-based land use map, but in this case, the subject property is in that yellow color, the neighborhood designation. The brown color that's immediately across the street from it and sort of surrounding Wadsworth is a neighborhood buffer, meaning that we recognize it's going to be a mix of uses as we transition from the sort of strictly residential neighborhood to a more intensive land use, in this case on Wadsworth or 38th Avenue. The red dotted line along Wadsworth here that goes north-south on the screen means primary commercial corridor, and the comp plan designates this area of Wadsworth specifically between 38th and 44th as our town center or our downtown, and a primary commercial corridor. 38th Avenue is on the south side here. This sort of brownish red designation means the Main Street corridor, and then 44th is a neighborhood commercial corridor. The blue shading represents a public use, so the school and the fire station are in there. The comprehensive plan calls for reinvestment on Wadsworth and 38th and within the town center area in general. And there are 6 key values that the comprehensive plan is organized around, one of which is to promote vibrant neighborhoods and an array of housing options. We certainly believe that this project supports that value and those goals. It provides a new housing type. There's not townhomes in this immediate vicinity, and also attracts new household types. You know, there's a house for every person and a person for every house, and the townhome product could potentially attract a new type of household to the community, which is one of the goals of the city. This image is from the 38th Avenue Corridor Plan, which was adopted subsequent to the comprehensive plan, and specifically looks at the area of 38th Avenue from Wadsworth to Sheridan, divides the area into sub-districts, which are those ovals and shadings that you're seeing. So again, the subject property is shown in that blue star, and it's located within the Wadsworth Town Center and downtown Wheat Ridge designations. This project, the site is well within walking distance of 38th Avenue, and it supports the 38th Avenue plan calling for robust commercial and residential markets. It's a project that is expected to add value. The traditional saying is that retail follows rooftops, and so we've had a lot of investment in the area and some new residential products, which are shown on this next image, a land use map. The yellow shading here represents single-family homes. The subject property is unshaded. The yellow has the single-family. The orange is a multifamily designation. And at the north and south end of Upham are where we've had some recent investments in, again, new sort of household types and housing options. This project is the town center apartments. Those are age-restricted, income-restricted apartments. The project on the south end of Upham, bookending the subject site, is the West End 38th project, which is under construction. That's market rate multifamily. The sort of hatching represents that it's ground floor mixed use, so some commercial uses there. Limited commercial on Upham. There's an office building and I think a now closed retail. The blue, again, is the school and the fire station. We think the project is appropriate given the land uses and the mix of uses on the street and following those other investments made at either end. Again, it's a project that's providing more home ownership opportunities, which is a project or a comprehensive goal. And ultimately, staff does feel that this request is supported by the zone change criteria. There are also criteria for review for a specific development plan, namely that it complies with the intent of a plan development, which, as I mentioned, is often to promote flexibility but also encourage innovation in design. The SDP is consistent with the uses and standards outlined in the ODP, and there's adequate infrastructure to service that development. The subdivision is consistent with the subdivision regulations and with that proposed zoning document. And so ultimately, we are recommending approval of the outline development plan, recommending approval of the SDP with one condition that was omitted from the staff report. We noticed that the cover sheet table has one row that's missing data on the height of the buildings that should be filled in. That was just an oversight. And then lastly, for the subdivision, recommending approval with a variety of our standard conditions. We typically require a subdivision improvement agreement that outlines the developer's obligations to construct those improvements on Upham that I mentioned, the requirement to pay that parkland fee in lieu of land dedication, review of homeowners association covenants, and a variety of other standard subdivision conditions. That's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions, and I know the applicant would also like to make some remarks.
Great, thank you for that report. Let's start with questions over here with Commissioner Weaver. Do you have any questions? No. Okay, Commissioner Leo, any questions? Commissioner Voss?
Lauren, are the utilities being provided in this new subdivision underground?
Yes, that's a good question. All new development, for all new development, utilities are required to be undergrounded.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Mr. Larson?
I'll pass for now.
Okay. Commissioner Dorsey? Commissioner Rowe?
Yeah, I have a couple. So the Jeffco basically letter of intent, that referral letter, it states that they intend to enter into a formal agreement for access and maintenance once the final terms of this agreement is accepted by the Jeffco schools. And that's because they're proposing, there is no on-site detention. So they're proposing putting in storm and putting that on the Stevens Elementary school site, which they would need a construction easement and then probably a maintenance easement and access easement. But those easements are in place currently. And so if, for some reason, I understand this is a letter of intent, but that might be something we need to think about just as a condition, because what my understanding is that if we were to approve it, then it goes before city council, and they're waiting for city council to say, yes, we approve this, and so maybe prior to plat recordation.
It's a good question. So the school district provided a letter that indicated that they were in agreement with the design. It's something that we require anytime there's detention that affects an off-site property owner, whether it's an institution or an individual. The school district doesn't like to execute those agreements and obligate themselves prematurely. So what we could do it a couple of different ways. We could require that they be executed prior to recordation of the plat. The plat has to be recorded within 90 days of council approval. We could also include a provision in the subdivision improvement agreement that requires they be executed prior to the issuance of any permit. So there's a couple different ways we could do that. I think either is probably acceptable. Maybe let the applicant, if they have a preference, we could let them talk to that, but certainly would be an appropriate condition of approval to add.
Yeah, down the road, I'd like to discuss that further, but I just want to make sure that we all understand that, because I don't want, I understand it kind of simply as, if there's a property, you have to have access to the property, and I don't want to create some type of situation where we've given approval, but now Jeffco maybe is waiting to give approval, and how do we?
Right, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg.
Yeah.
Typically, and maybe Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong, but we won't officially stamp the civil and final drainage as approved until we have those types of documents executed. We don't want to say that this is final if it couldn't be finalized for some reason.
Correct.
From the school board.
Yes, thank you. And then the next question I have is, this is just, there's a couple technical things, graphical. On sheet 1 of the SDP, the required and proposed building heights are blank. I see in some other documents there are some max heights.
Yes, so that was an oversight. That was the oversight. So the maximum building height established by the outline development plan is 35 feet, and the missing information on here is that dimension, and then the provided building height, which the way we measure building height is to the midpoint of a roof. There's some shed roofs and gable roofs here, so we can fill that in. And
Okay.
it would be appropriate for that to be a condition of approval prior to going to city council.
Okay. And then on sheet 2 of the ODP, there's 2 references to cover sheets. It says cover sheet on page 1 or cover sheet on page 2. I think that could probably be corrected. Okay. That's the only questions, comments I have for staff. Thank you.
Commissioner Peterson, any questions?
Yeah, this is depending on my memory because I can't find it right now. There was some discussion or suggestion that the community park inside had been reduced in size because of parking. Could you just run through that a little bit?
Sure, yeah, projects evolve from the time they come in and first submittal to the time that they're presented tonight. And so we've worked with the applicant to encourage them to find that balance between appropriate visitor parking, there's no magic number, and also not compromising their vision of having this sort of unique open space element. So I don't recall exactly how many parking spaces we started with, but it has increased over time, and it shrunk the size of that central park in order to provide additional visitor parking.
Is the new visitor parking around the park?
It is, yeah. I didn't call attention to that very well. So this gray shading is the access drives, but these sort of the unshaded area here is a bay of visitor parking, and likewise down here with one ADA accessible spot.
Any other questions?
Yeah, the only other thing, the height of the building, 35 feet, is thrown around. seems like I read somewhere that the actual height of the building is 30.
It ranges a little bit because of the different roof lines. So the highest height measurement that I was taking today to make sure we didn't, to make sure we had that condition of approval was 34 feet. So they range a little bit. Let me show you just the way that we define building height because of these different roof lines, essentially.
That's it.
All right. Commissioner Larson, did you have something?
Yes, thank you. Lauren, I in the subdivision plat, there's a discussion about homeowners associations. And I believe I understand how HOAs are set up and their responsibilities, but if you could help us understand, or help me anyway, understand what a metropolitan district would do and why that would be chosen over an HOA.
So I'll give you my understanding, and probably a good question to ask the applicant also as they're continuing to weigh those options. So homeowners association is established for a project like this often by the developer, and then the owners are the members of the HOA. The covenants would prescribe what the HOA fees are, and those are calculated based on sort of what the maintenance obligations. These are multiple owners of a single sort of building envelope, so those obligations include things related to the building, the landscaping, the drives, the detention. A metro district can serve a similar function in terms of maintenance. Metro districts are, instead of collecting an HOA fee, it's a mill levy. It's a quasi-governmental entity. It's a district, so it's protected differently by state statute. And they can also issue bonds. So we see metro districts, particularly increasingly with infill projects, when the infrastructure costs are sort of inordinate. You know, in a project like this, and particularly in Upham, there's had to be sanitary sewer upgrades. So aging infrastructure needing to accommodate new development will often warrant the creation of a metro district when there are sort of inordinate off-site costs. The metro district can be used just to help fund those infrastructure improvements, or also to maintain them in the future. You know, if a metro district is in place instead of an HOA, those fees are tax deductible versus an HOA. There's sort of pros and cons, and I think that's what the applicant is still weighing. A metro district is created through a service plan, which is approved by city council, and then goes to an election for the included properties, in this case just one. The other two areas in Wheat Ridge where we have metro districts are at the Jolly Rancher, the old Jolly Rancher property, where Toll Brothers is working on a project that's in our station area. And then the Yarrow Gardens townhome development, which is just south of 44th and just west of Wadsworth. They have a metro district in place also. So it's, you know, more common in some communities than others. Increasing, I would say we're getting increasing number of requests on them in Wheat Ridge just because of the challenges of infill.
How is it administered? Is it, you mentioned an election,
And then there's a
and
board.
their responsibilities are then to the city of Wheat Ridge, or?
No, to the function similarly to an HOA in that respect, that they're still sort of responsible for each other. Harder to dissolve a metro district than an HOA, so from a city standpoint, we like them in that there's more assurance that they will exist in perpetuity or for at least the life of the project. The applicant probably know a little bit more. I'm starting to speak out of my pay grade on metro districts.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Just a quick question about the community park. Even though it's not a public park, is the intent here for the park to be accessible to the general public, or is it reserved just for the owners?
Reserved for the owners. There is a cross-access easement, so guests, visitors, others can be in there, but not intended for sort of the neighborhood at large.
All right. That's hence the fees in lieu as part of the agreement. Okay. Anyone have any more questions for staff? All right. Thank you very much. Now we'd love to hear from the applicant, if the applicant has anything to add, and maybe take some additional questions from the commission. If one or more of you would like to come up and just state your name, business address for the record, and present your presentation, that would be great.
Good evening, Honorable Chairman and members of the Commission. Tony Del Grippo, Upham Partners LLC, 19209 West 53rd Loop in Golden, Colorado. We're really excited to bring this project before you tonight. We have the opportunity to do something really unique with this property. It's rare that we can get 4 contiguous parcels of this size near what this slide is really trying to depict, which is such a kind of a confluence of activity, public-private investment, long-term master plans, you name it, going on in that area. So what, well, probably best to use this since everyone can use the screen. Oops, there we go. So yeah, here's our property right up here with the site plan kind of dropped in. And obviously we've got a lot of activity going on near Wadsworth and 38th with some recent opening of the grocer. That project seems to be doing very, very well. Some more apartments coming in down there, and then as well as the West End 38th project. I mean, this is an area we looked at and just said, man, there's just an untapped potential for the retail uses, for the ease of transportation. Our goal has really been to design a first-time buyer product. It's kind of difficult to find that now with affordable housing. So trying to keep an affordable project has been our utmost importance. So we've really had a great opportunity to work with Jeffco, get our detention basin to engineer off-site. Very challenging site from an infrastructure standpoint. Our civil engineers did a great job in identifying a solution. Jeffco was very amenable to that. So I can answer some of those questions that came up about that. So I think by doing that, we then created the opportunity to have take advantage of this PRD and utilize the density, utilize the open space. I mean, we have plenty of room, for building separation, for front yards, really to create that unique project. We just felt the buyer profile in Wheat Ridge didn't want slot homes. This is not front doors 5 feet from property lines. You can drive down the streets and see examples of that, and that is not nearly what we wanted to create here. So we've spent a lot of time focusing on the Upham street frontage, working with our neighbors. We had the neighborhood meeting and 3 or 4 different neighborhood meetings, trying to make it as compatible as possible along that, and just having the opportunity for the park. We've done a number of these, and we haven't done one like this. We've had a really unique opportunity with an infill situation with a little bit of suburbanism, but a little bit of lifestyle that we can add to that. I do want to maybe address a couple of those questions since I'm up here regarding the Jeffco agreements. We're actually in final form on those agreements. I mean, final signatures are going around. I mean, today, signature versions of that. So they're almost executable, and we do have a temporary construction easement. So that'll give us the right to kind of come in through, kind of right underneath where that arrow is. We'll kind of easement from their parking lot over to the back of our structure or property, excuse me. And so we'll have a temporary construction easement, and that will get replaced by a long-term maintenance and access agreement, which will be governed and maintained by either an HOA or a metro district. And the decision on that is still being decided upon. The fact that we have this basin on a public piece of property and having the strength of the metro district being better than HOA, we strongly feel that there's a benefit to the school district and to the homeowners for long-term maintenance. I mean, it's a very critical piece of infrastructure. If it fails or doesn't get maintained properly over the long term of the project, we have issues both on our site as well as school children. So we need to make sure we do that right. We think that's the better long-term facility. The timing of that election, if we come through city council, would be after these hearings, would be a November election is the typical schedule for that. So we still have some time to sort that out and run the numbers and present that to council. I think that was the only outstanding question. I think Lauren did a tremendous job of presenting the project, and obviously moving on with that. The architecture is another facet of it. It may not play very well in some of those plain elevations, but we spent a lot of energy to create a variety of building types, colors, and materials. So there's going to be really no 2 buildings are going to look the same. Different roof materials, different color schemes, different brick patterns. It's not going to be cookie cutter like she said. So it'll feel like a nice little village, a nice neighborhood community. So That's been our vision. We're happy to share it with you, and if you have any other questions, the design team is here, from architects to landscape architect, civil engineering, and ourselves. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that information, and we'll get some questions from the commissioners. Commissioner Peterson, do you have any questions? Okay, Commissioner Ohm.
Yes, I have a couple, mostly on sheets 12 and 13 of the SDP. Let's see here. On landscape plan sheet 12 under ornamental trees, it says there's a tower poplar, which is the genus poplar, and they typically use a high amount of water and tend to sucker with age. I know the city's code states that it says it's encouraged that they want the use of xeric water-wise plant materials, which poplars or cottonwoods, aspens are the same genus. Why was that particular tree chosen?
If you have somebody could come up and answer that, that'd be great.
We have our landscape architect here, glad that she addressed.
Okay, yes, sorry about that. Okay.
My name is Julie Duncan. I'm representing Outdoor Design Group, the landscape architects on the project. Can you spell your last name? Gunther.
And could you lower the mic down just a little closer? Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So our intent with the tower poplar was the form and speed of which that grows, especially with this being a new development. There will not be any existing trees remaining on the site when construction starts. So the poplars grow and fill in very quickly and very nicely. However, a columnar oak, which is much less
Water intensive.
would be a wonderful substitute, and we're happy to make that.
Okay. And then, let's see, also on sheet 13, on the plan, it states that street trees are omitted from the site triangle. Could you explain, is that the tree's trunk or the tree's canopy?
The tree trunk, because it's above the 32-inch height maximum, but the 6-foot ceiling. So
But the,
it would only be the trunk that's in the tree triangle.
but the trunks grow to like 2 feet wide. Is that, I don't know what the city feels about that as far as, is that an obstruction, a 2 to 3 foot wide trunk? Or,
So tree trunks and utility poles, we can usually be flexible with just because
Okay.
it's not a complete obstruction.
okay.
Yes.
Also on sheet 13, it says one of the options, option C, artificial turf, which my understanding the city prohibits artificial turf.
That's correct. So our standard landscape provision is that we can't have artificial turf. So that's generally to prohibit, like, single-family front yard artificial turf. We do have a couple in the city, one recently approved by the Board of Adjustment. The outline development plan recognizes that that's typically prohibited and then calls for, specifically allows it in these limited front yard areas. And I believe on the SDP, it's primarily a maintenance issue for somebody who might choose it based on having a dog, for example.
Okay, so that's allowed by the city, okay. And then another question I have is, under evergreen trees, there's one Colorado blue spruce, and the chart shows it as growing about 20, 30 feet wide. On the plan, it appears to be about 15 feet wide and it's adjacent to the sidewalk. In fact, it's on the south side of the sidewalk. I don't know if you can go back to if there's a landscape plan on sheet 13 that we can reference. Yeah, that'll work fine. So if you look, yeah, right there, yes. My concern is that evergreen trees, in particular the Colorado blue spruce, is going to provide a lot of shade right there, and it creates a liability, health safety for the pedestrians on that north side, because it will be shaded in the wintertime. So why, is there a possibility that that tree could switch with a different tree, or?
Yes, we'd be
Okay.
happy to substitute that with a deciduous tree, or for example, a pinyon pine, which only grows a maximum of 25 feet high typically, and that takes 30 to 50 years for it to reach that height. And
Or-
they're also less densely branched.
Yeah.
So it would be more of a filtered shade rather than a dense shade that the blue spruce would provide.
I think my concern is just evergreen versus deciduous in the wintertime. I'm not going to make that condition, but it's just something that I wanted to bring your team aware of, about the shading and the icing. And then a very small question. Do you know, are there any existing fences? I see there's proposed new fence on the east side. Was there existing fence all the way north-south on that east side that you're removing?
Yes, there is currently an existing chain link fence. It sits right on the property line. Don't know when it was constructed, so I'm assuming it's kind of jointly.
It's like 5 foot or something, probably?
It's about 5 or 6 foot, yeah.
Okay.
Actually, a couple man gates between the two properties, so our intent is to remove that fence, replace it with a new wood fence. That'll be maintained by the association or district.
And will that fence, and the reason I bring that up is, will that fence go around the new catch basins or not?
It's going to go basically right on top of them. There's, what you're seeing right there is the inlet.
Yeah, the inlet, that concrete, probably a concrete structure, so are they going to go right, they're going to go right on top of that?
Right on top of it. The inlet will be
Okay.
like a curve.
Yeah.
It'll look like that, and then the
Okay.
spots will be beyond that.
I think that's the only, that's it. I have one last little comment, and I'm not sure that I need a response, but I was just curious why and this is more towards the landscape architect, why the ornamental grasses were 5 gallons instead of I usually see them typically like 1 gallon. I'll just leave that as I don't know if she could respond to that, but it will definitely not be a condition or anything like that.
We just find that the 5-gallon grasses typically have less transplant shock because the roots are stronger and a little more established at the get-go, and it gives the neighborhood that nice instant impact rather than small polka dots of grasses along the way. So it's more full.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Commissioner Dorsey, do you have any questions for the applicant? All right, Commissioner Larson, questions for the applicant?
Yeah, again, getting back to the subdivision plat document on easements, the electric service utility, you've mentioned that you're still working with Excel. Is there an issue in terms of why you haven't been able to come up with something yet?
Oh, it's just a little bit of the chicken and the egg. They require the building size and square footage. We've actually just kicked off our mechanical engineer and plumbing contractor, start doing the calculations on load for the panels. We have a preliminary layout that was identified early on, where the transformers would go, and ideally, right now, we're looking at transformers in and around the park. There's, I think, one right here and here, and there may be a third and fourth in the park as well. Or the over. Might have Jesse, our civil engineer, explain that. He coordinates that more.
Hi, Jesse Donovan, Bright Lighter Engineering, 3253 North Gaylord Street, Denver, Colorado. So currently there isn't, we have a preliminary layout with Excel. Like Tony said, we need the panels and the loading. So, and we generate one-line drawings that we give to Excel. So we'll be getting those to them in the next couple weeks, and then they have a 6-week design process. So it's kind of, we need to get to a certain point with, understanding that the project's moving forward, and then getting inside the buildings and designing that. Currently, we have a preliminary layout that shows two transformers within the park, and then possibly one down here. You guys can see that, and then one up in this area. It's a little bit limited in where they can go. They need a clear area in front so they can, switch the transformer on and off and make adjustments to it. But there's still, we'll get that design back probably in a month and a half from now, and they'll lay out how many transformers are needed.
Where would the easement enter the property?
So currently, it looks like the main easement would go along the bottom of the property, so along here, and then come up through the transformers, and then over across the back.
Okay.
You guys can see that. I think it would come in and loop into the interior as well. So the way Excel sets it up is, basically you have to get the entire site graded to within 6 inches of final grade, and then they get a temporary blanket easement. They install the lines, and then afterwards they survey it and give you your easement over the top of it. So, so it gives them a little bit of wiggle room as far as, you know, working around obstacles and understanding where that's actually going to be.
Good. Thank you.
Commissioner Voss, do you have any questions for the applicant?
I do have a few questions, and they're mostly ones of curiosity. Are you the same developer as the West End 38? No, okay. Is this your first time into the Wheat Ridge area?
This is our first project in Wheat Ridge, yes it is.
Okay. I do appreciate the more than 5 feet from the sidewalk setback. That's to be commended there. Curious, why the Ridge Top name?
It was a name. We obviously like the ridge at 38th and everything that's going on down there. You know, we wanted to play off of that a little bit without copywriting it completely. So that was kind of the play there. And obviously, it's a village. You know, it's 38 units. It's a pretty unique project. It's not just a standalone fourplex or one-off little project. So we're open to suggestions. We're not stuck on.
No, that's fine.
Maybe it may be different.
I figured the ridge for Wheat Ridge, but I wasn't quite sure about Ridge Top because there didn't seem to be a top of anything, so I was just curious. And then on page 4, do they have the same packet that we do? Lauren? Okay. Page 4 is architect and site design paragraph. Are you there? Okay. I was just curious about that whole wording, that what your intent is, what your meaning, what you're saying there. I guess my question is kind of, you've got contemporary traditional elements with references to mid-modern architects. So that's kind of like 3 separate things from my understanding. And then the ODP proposes slight modifications to the architectural and site design. If you could explain that a bit.
I'll do my best. I may need the architect to come up here, buddy, to help me out on this one. These guys have a better description on that. But the original intent with the play to mid-century, I mean, true mid-century is hard to do an exact townhome, right? You've got big roof overhangs, big strong features. So in a higher density project, it's a little hard. But we did try to do that with some of the shed roofs on the end of the building, keep it kind of creative feeling versus just a straight gable across, which is a very cost-effective way to build, but it's not the most attractive way to build, quite frankly. So really what we try to focus on is just, materials, which are the bricks, plain to the horizontal lines, which are in mid-century, architecture all across the board, and really just kind of working with the windows, just sizing and rotation. So a lot of that kind of is contemporary. It's not true mid-century, so there's a kind of plays on each of them to come up with. I think is a bit of a hybrid, but it has a nice combination, a nice modern flair that home buyers are going to go after, but still traditional layouts and materials that are cost effective for us to keep in a price range that is where we want to target these home buyers.
Well, I am glad that the rooftops aren't flat, because then it looks too much commercial. The rooftops aren't flat. I do appreciate that flair, as you put it, and some gabling in it. That's great. Thank you. Were you going to finish the other? The slight modification to the architectural and site design?
Yeah, my name is Buddy Poppet. 7382 South Odessa Circle, Centennial, Colorado. P is in Paul, OPPITT. And he actually pretty much said what I think I would have said, that it is sort of a kind of a mixed play. It's very difficult to do a mid-century mod in a 3-story concept, so trying to break down that scale, particularly on the ends, and bringing some elements from mid-century mod. And also there's some traditional elements of the architecture. So the idea was to kind of create a vibrant village feel that had variation in textures and colors, so it didn't feel like a cookie cutter architecture, with some simple modern touches.
All right, and I was looking for quote unquote proposes slight modifications to the architectural and site design manual.
I can probably address
Oh,
that
okay.
one. So most of the time when we have a multifamily project as a part of a planned development, they simply say, we'll comply with the ASDM, the Architectural and Site Design Manual. In this case, because of the desire to have those architectural styles represented here, they've proposed slightly more siding than we normally would allow, but also proposed more windows than we typically require. So those two statements are on the ODP and are unique to this specific development.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Leo, any questions for the applicant? No. Commissioner Weaver? All right. None from myself either. So thank you very much for helping us out with those questions. And now we will have the opportunity to get comments and questions from the public. All right, looks like we have a couple of folks, three folks here. So what I'll do is I'll go through this list. If you'd like to come up, if you have questions, please address them to the commission. We will then, once we get everybody's comments and questions, try and get those questions answered by either staff or the applicant. So we'll just start at the top here. Michelle McLeod, anything you want to say? Okay. Rhonda Norman. Hi, why don't you come on up, give us name and address for the minutes, please, and your comments.
My name is Rhonda Norman. I live at 4110 Upham Street, so just 3 houses up from the proposed development. My husband and I, we built a house on Upham Street. Everybody who's lived in Wheat Ridge apparently knows the story about the Price Brothers house burning down. So we hear that story all the time. That's where we built our home. So we just had some concerns. We were concerned about how far the multifamily zoning might begin to extend. We were a little worried that this request for a zoning change was going to be kind of a door opening for more zoning changes that would kind of swallow up the whole street as a multifamily. We are just on the other side of the R3. We're in the R2 area. So we were kind of curious about the long-term intent of the city for the street. I was wondering myself about affordable housing, how affordable these units would be. Affordable housing is definitely an issue. We have an older apartment building on the west side of the street that is very much a working class population. I've heard residents who are unhappy with that place because of the type of residents that are there, but everybody needs a place to live. So we need that kind of housing. So I was kind of curious if there was any accommodations for affordable housing with this new development. And the last concern that I had was how this construction timeline is going to mesh with the construction of the building that's on the corner of Upham and 38th. The idea of having 2 major construction projects on that street going at the same time is not a happy prospect for those of us who live there and try to use that street. So I don't know what the timing is for that. Sounds like you're still pretty far away from breaking ground. And they seem to be fairly far along there. So those are my kind of questions that I have. The comments that I have is I'm delighted. The architecture is really lovely. It's really nice. And I really appreciate your effort to make it like a village where it has some variety of facades and roof lines and things like that. That's nice to see. the inclusion of a little pocket park for those residents, that's also a nice thing. Wheat Ridge is not, when we walk the dog, we get in the car and we go to Crown Hill, it's not a terribly walkable neighborhood yet. We're hoping that that will change. But with sidewalks that are only 3 feet wide, that's what we had to put in front of our new house, you don't walk two abreast. And you don't walk with your stroller and your toddler and your dog on a sidewalk like that. So we're really hoping that this will be the beginning of maybe something a little more walkable in the neighborhood. And that's really all I see as far as the comments and questions that I had. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The other person we have signed up here for comment is Becky Zachmeyer. Hi, why don't you come on up?
Hi, I'm Becky Zachmeyer. I'm at 4200 Upham Street in Wheat Ridge. Zachmeier. Okay. A few questions. First of all, I'm here with some of my nearby neighbors, and none of us were notified. So we were curious as to how both the developer has been holding some meetings with residents and also of the notification that went out to neighbors, as there's not a different street that cuts through from 38th to 42nd. It's kind of like one long street. So, like, was there a determination of when that would stop past this new developed plan?
We'll get all the questions answered at one time. So, did you have other comments?
Yes. Sorry, I took notes, but I left my readers at home, so bear with me. Within the houses I heard were going to be townhomes. I'm wondering, is there going to be some kind of a stipulation that limits the number that can be rentals? And then is there a percentage that's affordable housing being offered or not? And then earlier in one of the slides, it showed a blue oval on the map of city center. Is it possible to see that slide again?
Sure, yeah, we can make that happen.
Okay, so the purple oval, and I'm assuming is the blue star where this development is going in? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So my property is within that Wadsworth Town Center. What does that mean?
I'll just answer this. These aren't like hard limits. These are more sort of general areas, kind of showing the, general focus of what the type of development that's being encouraged in these areas. So the area denoted as the Wadsworth Town Center, that's just indicating that this general neighborhood and area and space, and city staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's sort of the focus, but it's more of a soft focus. It doesn't have like a hard edge. Does that help?
Okay. Is there a point where the soft focus turns hard edge or no?
I don't think so. It's as like with any, we've had this a lot with a lot of the developments that kind of are along Wadsworth and 44th and 38th. There are these buffer areas where you have, like on Upham, you have this mix of development patterns between commercial, low density residential, high density residential, and so forth. So that's really, I think, what you would experience in sort of that transitional area. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Thanks. So then, a couple summers ago, or a couple of years ago, when they put in the senior housing at the end of the street, there was trucks up and down the street constantly through the summer. It really did do a number on the street, on the condition of the street, on the dirt that was blowing around the street, and just affecting property, workmen, garbage blowing up the street. It was just not a pleasant time for residents, and so I'm wondering if it's possible to make a request that trucks from
the construction site move to the south and not to the north past all the single-family homes.
All right, well, we'll see if we can get that addressed, those concerns. All right, thank you. Would anyone else from the public like to make a comment or ask a question? All right, with that, I'll close the, sorry, was there someone? Yep, come on up, sorry.
My name's Rob McLeod, M-C-L-E-O-D, and I had a letter of support in the packet, so you probably all have that, but I just wanted to make some public comments that I'm very enthusiastic about getting new neighbors next to us. Our home's been in Michelle's, my wife's family, since it was built in 1934, and she has fond memories of Upham being this vital, great community to visit her grandparents and stuff, and it's sort of stagnating right now, and I'm just really excited about some new life and stuff coming into the neighborhood. Really excited about seeing the slides of the architecture and the mid-century mod kind of vibe going on there, and just wanted to give you guys my support for the project.
Great. All right, thank you for your comments. Or is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay, with that, I'll close the public portion of the hearing, and we'll get some of these questions answered from both staff and the applicant, and then maybe if these comments spurred some more questions from the commissioners, we can get to that too. Let's start with the whole issue of the zoning, Lauren. There was a comment about concerns about this opening the door to more multifamily zoning in the future. Questions about the intent by the city moving forward in terms of how the zoning might change on and around Upham.
Sure, it's a good question. So, you know, each zone change request has to stand on its own and is reviewed sort of independently against our zone change criteria. You know, there's not any plan that calls for all of Upham being zoned R3 or PRD. I think the comprehensive plan does a good job of indicating that this should be a mix of housing types, right? The east side of Upham is designated in that yellow neighborhood. The west side of Upham is designated in that brown neighborhood buffer. So everything that we have in terms of our documents supports variety on Upham. And there's no agenda on behalf of the staff or the city in general to encourage or promote a certain type of zoning on Upham or sort of any street in the community.
All right, thanks. Let's talk about notifications. This is something we hear occasionally in a lot of cases. What were the requirements for notifications from the city's standpoint on these three cases?
So the codified requirement for a neighborhood meeting is to any property owner or tenant, so the mailing and physical address for a property within 600 feet. For public hearings prior to tonight, that radius is 300 feet. And then there's also signs posted on the property. So it's not uncommon. It's not based on like the length of the street or a block. It's a radial dimension from the boundary of the property. And we use the assessor's public records to do that mailing.
All right, and obviously Upham is one of those streets where, since it's so long, you know, it's
a half mile long.
It's a little more contiguous in terms of compared to your typical neighborhood street. So I understand that concern. Let's see. I think the other questions would be for the applicant.
The only other one I'll address, if I may. So haul routes, there was discussion about the condition of Upham.
Sure.
Jordan can correct me if I'm wrong. We recognize that Upham is in need of a mill and overlay, and that was scheduled for this year, but we also have a requirement that you can't cut into a street. So the overlay scope of work for this year was over budget, so Upham will be milled and overlaid in 2020. So it will sort of restore the condition of it after all the construction is completed. And then haul routes is something that we look at when we're issuing right-of-way permits. I'm not sure we can make a guarantee of which direction the trucks would go in this case, but we do a condition analysis and look at haul routes and adjacent land uses, and our Public Works Department would be reviewing that and making any conditions if that was appropriate.
And I guess related to that, do you have any idea what the construction schedule is for the West End 38th project? I know it's a phased development. I know the structure that's being built right now is sort of the first phase. There's more in the future. Do you have any insight on that?
It was originally, I think, 15 to 18-month construction timeline, and I'm not going to recall exactly when they started. But I know they're getting close to having the envelope dried in, so it'll be a lot more interior work. And once they finish some of their site work, they can maybe contain more of their subcontractors and traffic on the site. But I don't think they're intending to lease up until maybe the end of this year or next year.
And do you recall if they were planning on starting to work on any of the other phases, any of the other structures soon, or are they going to wait until that first one's all leased out?
So it's really just phased vertically. The ground floor is retail. The Vector Bank was the first phase, and that was completed, I think, last year, earlier this year. So there's no more building footprints to do. It's just the garage. It was the Vector Bank, and then the garage, and now the apartment multi-story building that you're seeing. So that was the third of the phases.
Oh, I thought I recalled that there was another multifamily structure, like an apartment structure, going on to the north of that at some point. Was that?
I think it's all connected.
Okay.
Oh no, they did not end up acquiring the property on the north side of that garage.
Okay, all right. Because
Vacant area there.
I just remember when we looked at it, there were more buildings than that. So that's what I was thinking of when I was thinking about phasing. Okay, all right. Any other insight to add to any of the other concerns? Okay, thanks. Mr. Del Grippo, if you want to come up, and I think a few more of the questions here. Let's talk about timeline for construction. What is your timeline anticipated to be?
Well, right now, if we stay on the path, get through city council over the next month or two, grading permit would likely be third quarter this year, maybe early fourth quarter, 2019. We would probably be starting our first vertical houses, 3 months after that. So, best case would be fourth quarter vertical starts, and then with 38 units at a reasonable pace. I mean, that's probably. The heavy work's going to be the site development, the earth moving, the utilities. There's going to be hammers and nails going on for probably 2 years after that. But the heavy earth moving is 3 or 4 months, and the whole site's pretty much done. And then it's the vertical part. So call it 2.5 years from today.
Okay, all right. In terms of rentals, I know I think it was in your proposal or maybe in the staff report, maybe it was from the neighborhood meeting, there had been some discussion about that. Could you talk about what your intent is in terms of these properties being owner-occupied, rental, anything like that?
Yeah, our intent is a for-sale project all the way through, owner-occupied. Granted, there's going to be investors that come in and purchase these. I mean, the price points are going to be likely in the mid-400s. That's just, that is a first-time home. It's hard to find a home at that price right now in the Denver metro. So we're still striving to achieve that. There's FHA regulations and restrictions with our HOA, things like that kind of limit the amount of owner-occupied. We have to have at least 51% owner-occupied units to get a conventional loan, FHA loan. So, those things get monitored through the process, but we are not marketing, for rent or investors. But they happen.
Sure. Okay, but there is, as you said, there's going to be some restrictions just in terms of your financing as far as how much could conceivably be investor purchased as opposed to owner purchased. Is that what you were saying?
There are some controls, yes.
Yeah.
We're under the FHA limit, so we're going to have some of those loans, and we're going to want to keep in that conformance. That's the goal. I mean, we're not trying to make these jumbo loan homes and outprice it. It's not the intent and the buyer profile and the demographic that we're targeting. These are first-time home buyers, young families. Maybe have a kid, maybe want to have kids, but young professionals.
And there were a couple of folks who expressed some concerns about accommodations for affordable housing. Is there any quota or number of units that you're envisioning offering at below market rate, or these are all market rate homes?
These are all going to be market rate.
Okay. All right. Let's see. All right, I think, do you want to address construction impact on Upham, and as far as where you see your traffic moving to the south versus the north on there?
We have to work on a phasing plan with, with the city, with the fire department, with a bunch of jurisdictions. So as we develop kind of how and which units get built, which is many months down the road, I mean, we'll have to coordinate that. We're going to hire a general contractor to run this, and it's kind of something that, there's two ways in, and you're either going to put all the traffic on your retail corridor, or you're going to put some through the residences. There's no right solution here. We don't have another bleed valve on this thing to, we can't go through the school. We are going to bring some construction equipment probably through there to work on that basin, but that's a very short-term project.
You don't have a sky hook in your budget?
No cranes on this project.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking like helicopters. You'd helicopter everything in. Oh, a little over budget? Okay. While we have you up here, do you guys have any additional questions that came up that you want to address to? Okay. All right. Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, any other questions for staff before we look at the motion?
A real quick one for the staff. Existing properties, 50 years old or so, it looks like there may be some outbuildings there that were maybe functioned as a garage or some sort of maybe fuel on site or oil. Does the city require soil sampling before building?
We do require some geotechnical reports as a part of the building permits for foundations. And then often what we see is that property owners will complete a phase one when they purchase the property to understand what they'll complete a phase one environmental study to understand if there's any contaminant.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, if there's nothing else, it's motion time.
And just a reminder, so we've provided 3 recommended motions in the packet. It sounds like there's maybe a couple of conditions that might get added. What we'd recommend is that you make one motion and vote on that motion and then proceed to the next.
Yeah, so we'd be motioning on the ODP, then the SDP, then the subdivision plat.
Do we want to have discussions before we do all 3, or do we want to make a motion and then discuss?
On
each one.
I would encourage us to maybe have a general discussion now before we make any motions, and then we'll have the opportunity to have some discussion on each motion as well.
Okay.
Amanda?
I just had a question that's probably part of this discussion now. Does the condition that we were discussing have to be on all of the motions?
In my opinion, yes. Okay. Because there's one that has to do with, the one is just, I just wanted to say, and I've written it down, about all minor corrections occur prior to city council public hearing. That's one of the issues is on the SDP, one was on the ODP, not the subdivision, but it certainly doesn't hurt if you just cover your bases. And then the other was prior to the plat and STB recordation, and even in the subdivision, that the applicant enters into a formal agreement with any necessary easements with Jeffo schools as required by the city.
Okay, so that's going to be attached.
That's all 3, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I can certainly bring up those 2 conditions to add on after the motions.
Since you have them all written down, I think you're the person for that.
Yeah.
And
you wrote it down, right?
Yeah, and I just had one comment that I wanted to make to the applicant and the staff that I think the project looks really nice. I'm really appreciative that you did on Upham. There was the opportunity to put the doors facing the street. I know sometimes that's not always possible, but I think that helps kind of tie it into the community. The landscape plan, I think it looks nice. I think I would have maybe wanted to see some larger trees on the north and south, but I'm certainly not going to make that condition. So thank you.
More discussions? Anything else we want to say?
I think it's a lovely project. I'm really excited for all the things that have been said tonight. And thank you for all the presentations and support, people.
Commissioner Leo, anything else you want to? I also just throw my 2 cents. I think this is really a nice project. It's great that the drainage option off to Jeffco is there. It allows for a little more room for maybe what I would call a more non-traditional townhome formation. It's definitely not yet another slot home development, which we've seen popping up all over the place in Northwest Denver. I know that's been a concern of a lot of Wheat Ridge residents, especially over in District 1 where I am, that it would kind of creep over. So this is nice. This is a nice alternative. We've also seen some other little pocket park and little inward facing in on a green type developments down on, I think, Elliott Street over in District 1, a much smaller, 8 or 10 unit development that we looked at that I think is getting started soon. So I think it's a really nice thing that can set Wheat Ridge apart a little bit from Denver and from some other developments. So it's nice to see these types of creative infill uses hit the ground. And so hopefully it'll be successful. So who wants to get started? I have the luxury of not having to make this because I'm the chair.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I move to recommend approval of case number WZ-18-17, a request for approval of a zone change from residential 3 to planned residential development with an outline development plan for a property located at 4000 to 4066 Upham Street for the following reasons. Number one, the proposed zone change will promote the public health, safety, and welfare of the community. It does not result in an adverse effect on the surrounding area. Number two, the proposed zone change is consistent with the goals and objectives of the city's comprehensive plan. Number three, the proposed zoning is consistent with the intent of a planned development compatible with surrounding land uses and will result in a high-quality development. Number four, the criteria used to evaluate a zone change support the request with the following two conditions. Number one, all minor corrections occur prior to City Council public hearing. Number two, prior to plat, SPD, SDP, and subdivision recordation, that the applicant enters into a formal agreement with any necessary easements with Jeffco Schools as required by the city.
All right.
I'll second.
Second?
I'll
Okay.
second that.
Discussion on the ODP motion? No? All right. No, if there's no more discussion, I'll call for a vote.
Motion carried 8-0.
All right, thank you. Next motion up would be the SDP.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make approval. I move to recommend approval of case number WZ-18-18, a request for approval of specific development plan of property located at 4000 to 4066 Upham Street for the following reasons. Number one, the specific development plan is consistent with the purpose of a planned development as stated in section 26-301 of the Code of Laws. Number two, the specific development plan is consistent with the intent and purpose of the outline development plan. Number three, the proposed uses are consistent with those approved by the outline development plan. Number four, all responding agencies have indicated that they consider the property with improvements installed at the developer's expense. Number five, the specific development plan is in substantial compliance with the applicable standards set forth in the outline development plan and with the city's adopted design manuals with the following two conditions. Number one, all minor corrections occur prior to City Council public hearing. Number two, prior to the plat, SDP, and subdivision recordation, that the applicant enters into a formal agreement with any necessary easements with Jeffco Schools as required by the city.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, if there's no further discussion, let's vote.
Motion carried 8-0.
All right, thank you. Our final motion would be on the subdivision plat.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I move to recommend approval of case number WS-18-02, request for approval of a 38-lot major subdivision plat for property located at 4000 and 4066 Upham Street for the following reasons. Number one, all requirements of the subdivision regulations have been met. Number two, the plat is consistent with zoning on the property. Number three, utility districts can serve the property with improvements installed at the developer's expense with the following conditions. Number one, sheet 2 shall be updated prior to the City Council public hearing to remove the existing parcel line between 4062 and 4066 Upham Street. Number 2, note 4 shall be updated prior to recordation to indicate the current zoning is PRD. Number 3, the applicant shall continue to coordinate utility service with the appropriate agencies, and any updated information regarding dry utility easement shall be reflected on the plat at recordation. Number 4, the developer shall enter into subdivision improvement agreement prior to recordation of subdivision plat. Number 5, the developer shall pay park fees at the time of plat recording in the amount of $84,907.86. Number 6, the homeowners association covenants and/or metropolitan district service plan shall be reviewed by staff prior to issuance of a building permit. Number 7, all minor corrections occur prior to city council public hearing. Number 8, prior to the subdivision recordation, that the applicant enters into a formal agreement with any necessary easements with Jeffco schools as required by the city.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? All right.
I have a question.
Oh, yep.
This is for staff. Under conditions number 6, of what does the review consist?
So we're typically looking to make sure that the commitment to maintain all of that common space is fulfilled through those covenants or service plan.
And nothing else?
Occasionally, but that is our number one thing that we're looking for. Because we don't enforce covenants, we don't look at the majority of the content of the covenants, but the common spaces is what we care about.
All right. Any other discussion? Okay, let's vote.
Motion carried 8-0.
All right. Thank you to everybody, staff, applicants, members of the public, commission on those 3 cases. That's it for cases. Do we have any old business? No. Okay, do we have any new business? I think we do.
Included in your packet was a resolution. This is a standard resolution that we are supposed to approve at the first meeting of every year that officially designates the posting locations, in this case, the City Hall lobby. So the recommended motion would just be approval of Resolution 01, 2019.
All right. Did everyone have a chance to read through this?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any, you have any questions for staff?
Just so I'm clear, Lauren, this is a requirement for the commission to approve this resolution annually?
Correct. All boards and commissions are required to approve the exact same resolution with their entity name every year.
And the reason, it sounds, wonderful, but I'm just, the reason why it's...
State statute.
The state makes us do it.
Okay, that's usually good enough, right? No, that's fine, thank you.
Vivian, did you have a question or a comment?
I had a question, comment. Why are we not publicizing in a newspaper?
So public hearings have separate notification requirements, which do include the newspaper.
That's not this.
This is just a designated location of where we post public meeting notices. So your agendas are posted in the lobby, and a meeting packet is always posted in the lobby. But there's other city code that provides for that additional notification. That's just not the state statute.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Janet, any questions? No. Amanda? No? Emery? Nobody? Okay. All right.
I'm going to move to approve Resolution 01-2019.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Okay, let's vote.
Motion passed 8-0.
All right, is there anything else? Anything else you want to let us know about?
Just a couple dates of note. We do, I think I mentioned last time, we have an NRS study session scheduled for March 21st. That week, the week of the 18th, is, for those who are watching, is being called the NRS Blitz Week. So the end of February, we'll have a community survey, an NRS survey that we'll be advertising widely and having public for 2 weeks. And then this Blitz week in March, there's a council study session on Monday. There will be 4 public open houses. Likely, our goal is to have one at the Active Adult Center, one at the Recreation Center, and then 2 at sort of other nodes, whether it's a school or a restaurant or something like that, and then your study session on that Thursday. So be all NRS all week. Look for more information on the city's website. It's the city homepage /NRS, as in Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy. So that's where we'll have those dates, locations, and the survey link coming up here soon.
The study session on the 21st with it's not a joint with the city council, it's
Correct.
just the neighborhood group?
Correct.
The entire
So
group, or?
They'll have, council will have a study session on Monday, and yours will be on Thursday, your regular meeting times.
Who represents the neighborhood group?
Sure, so there's a consultant, CZB, who I think you met some of those representatives at the last study session, and then council appointed 26 citizens to a steering committee. There are 3 co-chairs. I don't think we have the specific design of the study session down, so it won't be all 26 members of the steering committee. They meet a lot, but it will likely be staff, consultant, and then potentially some co-chairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the evening meeting or daytime? Or?
It'll be, so the 21st is a regular meeting date for Planning Commission. If there's nothing else on the agenda, we'll set up, it'll still be a televised public meeting at 7. Sometimes we set up down here at more of a discussion format. We may have a land use case on the docket, so we would do that first and then convene into study session after that. But the normal meeting time at 7.
So there may be something for us to talk about in terms of land use.
We have a couple
in addition
cases.
to the
Yes, yeah, we have a couple cases pending, because your meeting format doesn't have sort of distinct study sessions from business meetings, the way that council does. Occasionally, we've had to have regular business meeting and then a discussion. We do that for code amendments more often than anything else. So we'll see what is ready by the time we get to the March meetings.
And the study sessions are typically not public. They're not public record. It usually happens after all the other business, isn't that? Is that right?
I have to check the bylaws. I can't remember. I think often when it's after a business meeting, it's still televised and it's still a public meeting. Okay. But we don't typically you don't have a public hearing, so you're not taking public testimony on the topic.
Yeah. So people can sit and listen, and
correct,
if they're curious. But
yes,
yeah, it's
the intent is for our education, or are we going to be expected to make recommendations or? I think but all of the above. The goal has been to have a final report by May or June. So by March, I think we'd have our consultants hoping and steering committee are hoping to have sort of draft recommendations. And we want the community's buy-in on that, and our policymakers buy-in on that. And if to the extent that some of those recommendations would include, potentially code amendments or programs, and to the extent that you are all sort of a good focus group and representative of the community, I think they want your buy-in and your reactions to what those draft recommendations may be. And I would think that if the public surveys are taking place at the the end of this month. Mm-hmm. We will have time to see the results by the time the study session comes.
Correct, yeah, so the public survey is intended to inform some of the recommendations that then you would see in March.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
All right, well, I'd like to say I'll be looking forward to seeing that, but the new commissioner will get to do that, mm-hmm. So that'll be fun for them. All right, is there any other new business? All right. Next item up on the agenda is adjournment.
I make a motion to adjourn.
All right. Let's vote.
Motion passed 8-0.
All right. Thanks, everybody.